Hello, I'm Chris Cook. I'm a contributing editor here at Tortoise. Welcome to our Open News meeting. That was, for those of you who aren't familiar with that particular music, that was the Crystal Palace 1990 FA Cup squad singing Glad All Over, originally by the Dave Clark Five. That's in reference to the fact that we're probably going to end up talking quite a lot about football today. I will offer a spirited defense of the importance of football. It's a deeply gendered topic, of course, but it's also an enormously important cultural load-bearing. I can't think of how to end that sentence. It's also an important cultural pillar in our society. In the chat, my colleague James, who will be sort of comparing the chat, has put in a link to our news list. And you can see that at the top of that, we put down what is the European Super League and why football fans are upset by it. People who work from home are doing more unpaid overtime than those who go into an office. How do we control working hours into the future? How will Prince Philip's death change the monarchy? Those are things we'll see how we go. We'll see how things go. But I think we'll start with the football. I think my view on it is as the music may have hinted to you, coloured perhaps by the fact that I support a deeply unfashionable football team in Crystal Palace. One of the things that's most striking about this as an idea is obviously that it destroys the fundamental idea in European sport that we can that any team, if in principle, if they do well enough, can ascend the leagues. They can eventually move from national leagues into the European League, and instead replaces it with a closed shop, a cartel. What the importance of this really is that obviously those clubs that choose to put themselves into this closed shop will have a financial firepower to dominate their domestic leagues, and so it will have not just an effect on European competition, which will be closed, will have an effect on domestic competition too. So I think that's sort of the starting point for this really, is that I think it's underappreciated just how broad and upsetting this could be to a very large number of people. It means that for people like me, my team is likely to get thumped a lot more and have much less chance of being able to have decent seasons. We've got Alastair Campbell has written a piece for us this morning on the Super League and the betrayal of fans. Alastair's actually joined us, and I wonder if I could get him to kick us off. Yeah. So, I mean, Alastair, you, I think I'm allowed to say that as a Burnley fan, you also support a slightly unfashionable team.
I think we're a lot less fashionable even than Crystal Palace, I would say.
Well, what have I missed? What have I got wrong?
You haven't got anything wrong, I think it may be a more complicated story, and I think one of the things I've tried to reflect in the piece, as well as the reason why there has been such a kind of visceral, emotional response from so many quarters, and it's really, I can't remember the last story where there literally appeared to be nobody who was defending it, including those people who put it together, who've all, they don't like giving interviews anyway. I think I'm right in saying Abramovich has never given an interview since he took over Chelsea. But I think the other point I've tried to make is this is also, it kind of is the direction of travel that we've been going for a long, long time. And a lot of the people who are today, screaming and shouting and saying how awful it is, they have been part of that journey. We all have to some extent, because even while we felt uncomfortable about some of the things that have been happening in football, the money, the betting sponsorship, the alcohol sponsorship, the foreign owners, the fit and proper person test, frankly, barely being applied. We've all sort of gone on with it because, those of us who like football really love it, and those of you who don't really get why we love it so much. And that includes, by the way, an awful lot of people in politics. I don't underestimate how football is not, there aren't that many massive football fans in in Parliament. I was always seen as a bit of a kind of weirdo, the fact that I would kind of go to games home and away and all that sort of stuff. So I think that it's not as if this has just kind of arrived out of a clear blue sky. For these clubs, this is the logical next step of the journey that they've been on for quite some time. And we've all a little bit been too much part of that, I think.
Right. So what do you think the right next steps are?
Well, I think it's good. Whatever happens, I think it's going to end up in the courts. I mean, it was interesting. Gary Neville, who had that spectacular and rather brilliant meltdown on Sky the other night during the Man United Burnley game, and he is saying, this lot of bottle merchants, and ultimately they'll back down. I'm not sure about that. I think they will see this as a legal business case. And so I think it's going to end up in the courts in some shape or form. They might respond to political pressure. There's a rumour going around that one of the 6 English clubs is about to pull out. I don't know if that's true or not. But that some people are better at taking heat than others. They're going to get a lot of heat, these people, a lot of heat, because I think football, it was Arrigo Sacchi, the Italian coach, who said that, football is the most important of all the least important things, but it doesn't matter an awful lot to people. And I think the other thing that's really interesting to me, which I reflected in the article for you, is that the German situation is really interesting. I don't see how you can call a European Super League a Super League if you don't have Bayern Munich in it. Bayern Munich to me are the best club in Europe. And I'd put them even ahead of Burnley, which is, how much I respect them. But the real reason they're not in there, beyond the fact that hopefully they just thought this is a terrible idea. But the other reason is that the structure of German clubs means that they couldn't have made a decision like this without getting support from the fans because of the ownership model of German football clubs. It's a totally different model. It's the 50+1, which means the club has to own the voting rights. They can't, as it were, give them to some, wealthy foreign benefactor. And that has made the German football, I think, a much better league. I mean, we go on in this country about the Premier League being the best league in the world, and it pays the most, and therefore probably gets most of the best players. But I actually think the Bundesliga, as a sort of pure football fan, is the best league in the world.
So one of the things that we've seen that's come out in the last sort of hour is that the Guardian's reported that Johnson has asked for a legislative bomb in response. I mean, if you were in your old haunt in Downing Street, do you have any thoughts about what you'd be proposing?
Well, that sounds like something where there's an issue has come along and he thinks he can exploit it politically without thinking through the consequences of what he's saying. Where have we seen that before? Brexit and pretty much everything else he's ever touched. So I don't know. I haven't seen anything on what a legislative proposal would look like. And it will be, you're into, the thing about people sort of look at sport as an entertainment, which it is, but it's an incredibly big and complicated global business. And they have some of the best lawyers in the world, these sporting bodies. So I don't know what that would be. I mean, are you saying that? I think far more likely is whether something will come from this meeting of the 14 other Premier League clubs today, whether they can, come together and do something that really forces them back to the table to sort of see the error of their ways. But I think that's going to be very difficult as well. And your chairman, Steve Parish, was on the news last night, indicating to me that they don't particularly want to do the hardball stuff. And that was obviously just one club, but they're all talking to each other all the time. So, how do you ban? The thing about this is that you're talking about sport, you're talking about a business. And I think the other problem for Johnson is that he'll be doing this because, he's basically a populist, and football's a very, very, it's a popular sport and people care a lot about it. So he's trying to look like he's active. And he would see it as a political triumph if it could be stopped, whatever the reasons for it being stopped. So, but I don't know what the legislative approach would be. That's something that civil servants will be instructed to work on now.
And I mean, one of the things that's come out in the last few days, last day, has been the they've come forward with this review that's being run by Tracy Crouch, who's a
Mm.
former sports minister, who has sort of indicated it's going to be a wide-ranging review of the governance of football. I mean, that's something that could point more towards a long-term move towards a sort of 50+1 approach.
I don't think they'll go that far, because I think the English clubs in particular have just gone too far down a certain road. But I think that I'm going to say something quite rare, because she is a Tory after all. But I like Tracy Crouch, and I think she was a good sports minister, and I think she gets this in a way that Johnson doesn't. Whether it will go down the road of an independent football regulator, I think that might be more likely. But listen, football, this is the other thing. So many people are coming to this as though it's a kind of new thing. The new thing is the idea of the European Super League, which has been around for ages. The old thing of football being very badly run, apart from actually the Premier League, which by its own lights, I wrote a book about winners, and I actually cited Richard Scudamore, who was the boss of the Premier League, as the guy's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant for the purpose of running the Premier League. That's not the same thing as for the purpose of running English football. And I think if there's one good thing that might come out of this, it's that acceptance that football has not been well run for a long, long time.
Sure. And one final thing, and like a personal emotional thing, I would be completely nonplussed and unfussed about expelling these teams from the league and promoting 6 other teams. They're big fish in a small pond, but let's see how they do outside the pond. As a fan of as a less fashionable club, how would you feel about a league without City or United or Liverpool in it?
Well, apart from Arsenal and Everton, the top league has always had one of those people missing. I mean, they've all been out at some point, rather. I think Everton and Arsenal are the only teams that have never been relegated. So I think people would adapt. Look, I still get a buzz out of going to bigger games, so-called. But equally, I've got to be honest, I'm sure you'll relate to this as well. I really enjoyed it when we were in the Championship. I love Championship football. So it wouldn't bother me that much. And I think something does have to give in relation to this. Something has got to give from football just being about very wealthy foreign people owning clubs that they don't really care about. They wear the scarf, they deliver the platitudes about how important the fans are. I actually think they've been enjoying empty stadia. I know they've lost a lot of money, but I'll tell you one thing, they wouldn't have been able to announce this in the middle of an ordinary football season, because they'd have had massive demonstrations outside. I should also see, but by the way, Chris, you should have a look at my last tweet. I tweeted a picture of the Premier League, the end of the Premier League season 2017-18, and I've declared that Burnley are actually Premier League champions, because it goes Man City, Man United, Tottenham, Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, Burnley. We came 7th in the old system, but we're now officially Premier League champions 2017-18. So that's good news.
I would strongly encourage this approach, because it gives Palace the 1991 First Division as well. So I'm and 2 FA Cups. So
excellent, well done.
Big victories for us. I wonder if I could come to sorry, I've lost my notes. To Andrew Butler. Andrew's been.
Yes. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Andrew. Oh, there you are. Sorry. The effect on the women's game is something we've not talked about either.
Yeah, which is, perhaps not surprising that after all of this, it's always a bit of an afterthought, which is shameful from all league organisers. As someone mentioned it in the chat, the press release they put out had 27 words in regards to what the women's format of this new league would be. But when it comes to how it would affect the women's game in this country, is interesting, because the Women's Super League in this country is currently onto quite a good thing. They've signed a £10 million deal, which, yes, I know is not anywhere close to what the men's game currently brings in revenue wise, but it's getting closer and closer, and it is onto a good thing. But the corresponding teams, the men's team, which would be in the European Super League, doesn't correspond to the best teams in the Women's League, if you see what I mean. So Chelsea, Man United, Man City and Arsenal are currently top of the Women's Super League in this country. They're 4 of the teams that would be in the European Super League. But Liverpool got relegated from the Women's Super League last season. And Spurs, I mean, they're about, I don't want to offend anyone here, but they're about as relevant in the women's game as they are in the men's game when it comes to these sort of conversations. They don't win anything. Liverpool, as someone mentioned, the Guardian did a good piece about how this would impact the women's game. Liverpool opened up a lovely new training ground for their men's teams, which involved beach volleyball courts, but they don't fund their women's team well enough at all. They spent less than £1 million on their women's team last season. Lyon are the most successful women's team in the global game. Obviously, their men's team hasn't got a mention in being involved in the European Super League, so it doesn't correlate to how the women's teams will be included or not included in an overall European Super League.
So in short, just as with the men's Super League, it's been obligatory to make a joke about how it's 11 elite clubs and Spurs. It's basically all Spurs on the women's side.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, as you can probably tell from my background, in fact, I'm contractually obliged to say I don't really have much skin in the game because I'm a Leyton Orient fan, which is if Alastair's a Burnley fan and you're a Crystal Palace fan, Chris, being an Orient fan, I don't know, how unfashionable that would be. But back to that point, the teams don't correlate when it comes to men's and women's game, but also you just get the feeling from the fact that they put 27 words into their original press release, which would have been pored over by lawyers and clubs as a collective agreement, that this is an afterthought. They've also said that they'll try and start a league at the earliest possible moment. Who knows when that will be? So it's a terrible idea from start to finish, ill thought through, and yeah, I really hope it doesn't happen, because yeah, it kind of ruins everything good that football around the world has been built on.
When I mentioned at the beginning that it's an intrinsically gendered topic, I saw Lynn Stagg raise her eyebrows and sort of give me a quizzical look. I see in the I don't know if Lynn, if we could get you to speak. Why? I mean, your eyebrows raised high enough that I can see them even on the little screen. What sparks that?
Well, it's just I've supported football for decades, not necessarily in this country, because I actually come from South Africa. So basically that's a long time ago. And only recently did I decide to support any team. And now, to my chagrin, having decided to support Manchester City women, and I say that regardedly because basically I follow the women's game, I'm just absolutely so disappointed in all of this. And there are a lot more women and in fact families who follow the women's game because they know they can go to the grounds and feel safe and so on and so forth. And of course, it costs so little. Your children generally get in free. So that's one of the things I'd like to say. The other is I didn't see the 27 words. Maybe if I'd seen them, I might have been even more angry than I am. But I'm seriously considering not watching football at all, which obviously will distress me and many of my friends who think I'm completely mad anyway. So really, that's all I wanted to say. It's just that I don't understand why. I know it's all about money these days, but it's stopping people who would be able to have an outlet in sport, maybe even deciding they want to have anything to do with it.
Can I ask, what is it particularly that's upset you in particular?
Well, I just think it's the fact that it's all predicated on money. We've only just got this TV deal where I'll be able to actually see some women's football. At the moment, we've only got a free, and it is free, the FA player. But a lot of the time, you just have to listen to it on the radio. You can't actually see the games. And it's very disappointing for anyone who just follows football in general and not necessarily supports a club. I know it's taken me nearly 7 decades to support a club, but there we go.
I wonder if I could go to Megan Kenyon. Oh, this is slightly jumping on her. This is the risk, obviously, of
sorry.
If you say interesting things. So you're asking about what implications it might have on the sort of supply check, like the supply line of new players.
Yeah, I just wonder if all the money is going to these big clubs, surely that will have implications on younger people. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not a football expert. Like, I literally have done all my reading over the past day. But I just wonder whether, if all that money is going to the bigger clubs and smaller clubs are getting less money, and if I'm right, smaller clubs are probably more accessible in terms of younger people getting into the game. I wonder, yeah, what implication it will have for younger people who want to get into football and want to do some training.
Right.
I was just wondering about that.
Well, I think my guess would be that if you pull more money into a smaller group of them, the average bit of infrastructure for training people will have less cash to put into it. So the average club will lose out from this, and a small number will gain, which must mean that the sort of average infrastructure must get worse. So I think you're right to be worried. I mean that strikes me as a proper and serious concern. Yelena, I was wondering if we could, pronounce your name correctly. Is that Yelena?
You've pronounced Yelena was perfect, Chris. I think that's probably the best pronunciation I'm thinking I've had.
Well, that's a brutal burn on my colleagues. But you raised the question of sports washing as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, like Megan, I'm neither a football expert nor a particular football enthusiast, but I've been absolutely riveted by this. I think partly because I've been linking it back into the politics of Eurovision, and that's kind of how I'm comparing the two to make it work in my mind. But yeah, I think sports washing ties into this really interestingly. I know Alastair raised it about the Big Six and having overseas owners. And for me, I think this whole story should be considered as well in the context of the news that came out last week about MBS and lobbying Johnson about Newcastle United. This idea that we can separate politics from sport, or even like politics from business interests and private business, if that's how you want to consider these teams. I think this just completely shows how that's utterly ludicrous, and they're all completely tied together. And I'd really like to see more on that, and the sort of political intervention, how it takes football, something, as you said, that bears great cultural capital in this country, to get a conservative government to intervene. I think it's just been absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to know more about that kind of side of it.
One of the slightly, I think I'm struck by the fact that two of the worst offenders for sports washing really are Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain, and one of them has decided to jump in with this. So Manchester City have gone in with it, and Paris Saint-Germain have not. They are respectively, Paris Saint-Germain is the Qataris, and Man City is the Abu Dhabi royal family. So it's it's interesting. They've taken divergent paths on how they sort of deploy their sort of sports washing processes. I think the others are all just craven, egregious money grubbers rather than sports washers in the Super League. I wonder if we could come back to Alastair about that actually, and the if you like the for want of a better word, the press end of what it means to be in the Super League for these people. I mean, my gut feeling is that the Glazers are probably, for example, the owners, the owners of Manchester United, and perhaps the archetypes of the. Oh, sorry, Dave Olsen points out Roman Abramovich is definitely a sports washer. That's a fair cop. The Glazers strike me as likely to have made a mistake by going in with this. Like it feels like if anything is going to unpick the plutocracy in football, it's this sort of overreach.
Yeah, well, possibly, but I wouldn't guarantee it. And don't forget, the Glazers have been through that whole period. You remember when the Man United fans decided they were going to stop having red and white colours and they were going back to the green and gold, which was the Newton Heath colours from 1902. And every week, and it was very colourful, and it was actually felt kind of, you know, like a proper protest. That every game at Old Trafford, you just see thousands of people twirling these green and gold scarves as a way of saying, you are not Man United, you are not our club. And it was a, you know, pretty powerful protest. Well, the protests have stopped and the Glazers are still there and they're just part of this. And I think that although I think they probably will be a bit taken aback by the sheer weight and the universality of the condemnation, I think they'll be thinking, well, you know, we've started on this road, we're going to try and tough it out. I mean, it's been really interesting to watch them. All six have said nothing, not a word. Since they're just hiding behind that statement, which I agree with. Was it Dan? It was just you know, the women's paragraph sort of shot out. So frankly, did the whole thing about, you know, how the solidarity payments are going to go up for the rest of the game. No detail as to how, nothing. So, and I think, by the way, your point about City and PSG going in different directions, there may be a sense of we don't want to be in bed together. But also, don't underestimate in football the importance of very personal relationships. And I think that the top brass at UEFA are pretty close to the top brass at PSG. And whether they've been kind of lent on, I just don't know. But I think the fact that you don't have any French club, more importantly, you don't have any German club, means that this is a Super League, a European Super League in name only, and hopefully that's how it'll stay.
But I'm struck that this is like part of the value of these leagues is also the sort of the prospect of a little club like a Porto, or forgive me for saying Celtic as a very small club. They're a big club in a very little country, I guess I should say.
Well, the first British club to win the European Cup.
But the
May the 25th, 1967. Don't forget that.
So my point being, these are things that are sort of enormously valuable to the teams. You know, every Villa fan knows about, you know, their European success. You know, I have a friend who's a Norwich fan who bangs on about their beating Bayern Munich.
Yeah.
You know, years later they didn't win anything, but they beat Bayern Munich, and they like the cultural importance for little teams of being able to get into these competitions is something that is going to be phased out.
Well, I really hope for your sake, Chris, that there are no Scottish journalists taking part in this, because a London metropolitan elite thinking person coming on and calling Celtic a little club is Celtic actually is one of the biggest clubs in the world by fan base, if you want to measure it by fan base. But I think, look, that's the whole point of sport, though. The whole point of sport is that people strive to be the best that they can be, and they're in competition. And you mentioned Aston Villa. I mean, Nottingham Forest have, you know, they're in the Championship now, but they've got one of the most extraordinary histories. Derby. You know, you're talking about clubs that the first ever European game I saw, sadly wasn't a Burnley game. It was Leeds against Kilmarnock in the Fairs Cup. Now, what will happen with this? If this does go ahead, you'll have the European Super League. There will be other competitions, but you'll have a situation where even something like see how the FA Cup has been devalued. Let's just accept the FA Cup has been devalued. The Premier League is going to get devalued if these six clubs aren't in it. And then what will happen is that the big clubs, if they are still allowed to play in the Premier League, and that's a moot point, but if they are, they will be using that as like they'll be playing the players that they currently use for the Carabao Cup. So they'll have these enormous squads, like, you know, whereas Burnley, Crystal Palace, etc., will just have to kind of roll on as we are. So it's a massive, massive, massive change. And the fact of it being done without any, I mean, even if you accept that because of the sort of market sensitivity that they don't want to talk to the consult the fans, the fact that Alex Ferguson didn't have a clue, the fact that none of the managers had a clue, even though they were out facing the media at the time. I mean, it's just, it's been so, it's not just such a bad plan, it's been so badly executed, but I fear that they still think they're on track.
Okay. This is, can I go to Andrew Goodwood? Because Andrew is expressing, I think it's fair to say, the view of a sort of traditional liberal, not liker of football.
That's me, yeah.
So what, I mean, what's your response to it, other than to be annoyed that people keep talking about it?
Well, yeah, a little, because there's lots of green news out today. I just don't see it matters, right? I mean, who cares whether these highly paid mercenaries kick their ball around? It makes it seems it's just a redistribution of money. The cake's just getting cut in a different way. The problem is the cake's made up of ingredients, all that money that could be better spent elsewhere. We would still have the sport and all the competition if you could just take the money out and redistribute it more fairly.
I mean, yeah, I think I think, however, whatever chance there is of a 50+1, Andrew, I think the Sovietization of the football system is even less likely, I'm afraid.
But if you think this will lead to sort of an oversight, government oversight, could that not come with it sponsorship caps and all sorts of other regulations that act as a depression on the money that football soaks up?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're. It turns so that someone has just dropped in the chat a link to an FT report saying that they're talking about trying to introduce wage caps in an attempt to sort of. We have to see wage caps as an attempt by the owners of these clubs to maximise their profit share and minimise the labour share. I mean, yeah. I wonder if I could go to my colleague Tessa Murray.
You sure about that, Chris?
Well, we'll see. I mean, you were being expressing some sang-froid about this as well.
I was. I just think if you've been around the block on sport a few times, we've had so many of these moments where there'll be a change, it'll inevitably be money driven. All the sky's going to fall in and everyone runs around like chicken licking on it. And I just, I'm not as incensed or outraged or surprised by this. I think what's interesting is the kind of some of the as we're talking, about PSG and the relationships that are really driving this, and how much of this is a proxy war for other things that are going on. And the bit, if I really needed to summon up some interest about this, I would be lifting the bonnet on the sort of really long-standing tortuous relationship between Glazers and JP Morgan. I'd be turning my attention to sort of what all this money does, and back to the sports washing idea, the sort of road to Qatar is littered with enslaved bodies. This, will this be the end of football? No. Will the water close over? Yes. But does it give us a chance to look at sport in its most unsavory light? Yes, it does. That's sort of where I'm at. I just get, if you remember sort of the absolute screaming outrage about Packer and cricket, we have sort of been here in various guises, but I understand it touches a lot of people in a way it doesn't touch me emotionally, but it touches me, and I'm interested in it in terms of, as ever, follow the money.
Right. So, and there are there other you sort of obliquely refer to other sports as well?
Well, we've had IPL. I'm thinking of cricket. And also, gosh, I'm old enough to remember the fact that everybody thought the world was going to fall over when the Premier League was established. And I know I take the point from James Wilson, everybody else, that there's a non-competitive element to this, and I get that, and I understand what it does to the sort of ecosystem to a degree. But you know, we've had it with IPL, we've had it with Packers World Series, you know, that we had it sort of, you know, just with the professionalism of sport, you know, as a whole, and versus sort of Olympics. So Olympians, I mean. So I understand. I do understand. I was married to a devout Arsenal fan for 23 years. I get it. It releases something in men that they can't emotionally express otherwise. But I'm more interested in the relationships and the deals and what's being sewn up behind this, and yeah, people like JPM and the Glazers, and really what's going on and who's driving the agenda.
Okay. I wonder if I could go to Ellen Halliday, who again has made the fatal error of saying something interesting in the. I mean, Ellen, you started watching the Bundesliga.
Yeah, I am not a football expert at all. Started playing extremely badly, and even more recently started watching a bit, and mainly the Bundesliga, to be honest, because my partner is German. But the thing that really interests me is the politics and the fan culture. And I think in the Bundesliga, maybe because of this 50+1 mechanism that Alastair mentioned, it's kind of like, it's quite different from what I understand the fan culture is like in English football. But it's also been changing a lot. So you've got huge clubs like RB Leipzig that have had massive investment in recent years. And that's been part of a trend over, like, I think about a decade, where big clubs in Germany have been actually seeking more of this investment. So there's like a movement in that direction there, actually. I mean, Bayern is obviously also another really rich one, but Leipzig is the one that kind of like first comes to mind. And that's kind of had an impact then on the fan culture. So you have had fan groups that have been that have disbanded, and you have some that are on the right wing and some of the left wing, and there's kind of a lot of movement there in Germany, partly related to this money that's coming in, who's buying the clubs and so on. So yeah, I mean, I just find that really fascinating. I went to a Werder Bremen game a few years ago, and you know, like in the stands with where the one with the ultras are in, they're not just like waving banners and flags for their favorite players, but also like commenting on education policy and like social policy in the stands. And I kind of found that amazing, and I didn't expect it. So that's my very inexpert view. Yeah.
I wonder if I could go to. Thanks ever so much, Ellen. I wonder if I could go to. I managed to not make a comment about small football clubs in Scotland as well, which I was quite pleased about there. I wonder if we could go to Dave Olson, who has made a string of interesting points, and again, perhaps unwisely. I'll have to pester him to put his. Oh no, no from Dave. Oh, hang on a minute. James Harding. Can we go to James Harding?
Chris, this is genuinely not a kind of, you know, those questions where you're asking them because you're like, now I'm going to make my insightful point wrapped in this question. This is, I really don't understand this. So here are my three questions I don't understand. One, I don't understand what the argument that Perez made to the other 11 to get them to sign up, because I find it hard to believe that it was just the money. Right? I know that everyone would love it to be just the money, but he must have landed a kind of Indian Premier League, NFL.
Why do you think they like the Indian Premier League, James?
No, but there must have been a cultural point that they were made. Do you know what I mean? With these people, you need to have. No. I know that that's the thing. That everyone's like, oh yeah, they'll have just. But they've got a certain amount of money. If they think that money will be the power to attract more players, I can't understand. I almost want to go on the radio and make the case for it because no one else is making the case for it. I just want to know what that argument is. I see Tess got a hand up. My two other quick questions. So one is, I don't understand what the argument was. I fully don't, other than the money. The second thing is, this feels to me like one of those moments, like sort of kind of groupthink in the media around the internet, where everyone says it's terrible, but no one comes up with an answer for what's to be done. And in fact, the suggestion that somehow government should intervene is considered to be even worse. Right, so everyone admires the problem but doesn't have a constructive solution. And the third thing I don't understand is the sort of Jurgen Klopp problem, which is, how can you be such a significant sort of moral force in the game and then say you don't really have agency in terms of what happens here? Why can't a Marcus Rashford or a Jurgen Klopp say, I won't participate on this? So what agency do players and managers have? And I genuinely don't know the answer to any of those questions.
I think on we actually, the stuff from the FT has just gone up is actually quite helpful for the first part of the question, I think, because if they one of the things they're talking about is putting in a wage cap for these clubs. And if you think about what that does, that's a thing you can sell to the other teams, because you can say, look, we're actually not going to outspend you by very much, so we should let us stay in the league. And what it means is that all of the extra revenue can go straight to the shareholders, right? So it's a profits maximizing model for these clubs. And I don't think, I mean, I hate to be tedious about this, but like, it's very, like, there's that famous Mrs. Merton interview with Debbie McGee, where she asks her, what was it that first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels? I'm not sure you need much more than 4 billion euros a year. I'm also not sure I agree that I don't think the government intervention is part. I think it's just a failure of imagination, because everyone in Britain believes the government can never do anything. But it's really easy to fix. It's really easy. Like, you could just nationalize them. They're really cheap. They're quite small businesses. You could just buy them up and mutualize them.
And is there, Chris, there's not an argument within, so let me just run it. There's not an argument within football circles that, for example, the top club players are playing too much football, and as a result, they're too injury prone. And as a result, even European football is struggling to compete with what's happening in Latin American football or rising football clubs. There's not an appeal to anything other than money in all this. Is that right? There's nothing.
No. So that's the core point. Is really if first of all, if this was genuinely like the elite league, these are not the 12 you choose. I keep making jokes about Spurs. Spurs have not won the Premiership since Alec Douglas-Home did. Right? They are like a phenomenally unsuccessful club given how much money they spend, and for some reason they've never won a European trophy of any note. Anyway, they might have won one of the sort of like junior trophies, the participation cups. But they've not been chosen on that basis. They've been chosen on a sort of money basis. And in any case, they don't want to reduce the amount that anyone's playing. They want to increase the amount that people are playing, and they want them to be more high intensity games, right? So they're not. There's no way I think anyone believes there's anything in this but money. I mean, I'm happy to be.
I see Alistair's got his hand up. Maybe he's got a.
Alastair, yes.
Well, the only if I was them trying to pretend that it wasn't just about money, the one little argument that they've got is they could project it for themselves as a fairness argument that they are the big draw in the main. I mean, not Spurs and not Arsenal, but certainly Man United, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus. They are the big draw, and they would argue that they don't get their fair share of the sports revenues. And that's actually, if you do take a kind of, market capitalist view of this, then that is a fair point. And I think that's the argument that he'll have used with them. We're not going to get what we deserve if we carry on just negotiating with UEFA, because ultimately they've got a bigger game to play and they're in charge of the international game as well. And your point about Klopp, James, is Klopp is an amazing sort of character, and he's he's quite left wing and et cetera, but these guys are very, very, I thought even last night he was probably sailing quite close to the wind in terms of his whatever contractual obligations he has to what he can and can't say. They're very, very tightly bound, and anything that undermines the club is probably a sackable offence. And as we saw with Mourinho yesterday, these guys think nothing about sacking very well paid, very famous people.
I mean, it's also the case that if you are, so I mean, he was a former Dortmund manager, right? He's someone who's also been very open about his views about this before, when it was a sort of hypothetical. He's someone who's, you know, was Dortmund manager, so from a club that would, he was on a sort of production line that would not have existed basically under this model. His kind of a club would have been, you know, second tier. But also, like, these people want to play. If there is going to be a Super League, they want to play in it. Like, if you are an elite sportsman, you want to play with the elite sportsman. There is a. I mean, before he became a sage on this stuff, Gary Neville once said that you should never look to elite sportsmen or sportswomen for moral guidance, because their fundamental starting place is, how do I get to being a winner? Like, they're not here to be your friend. They're here to do whatever it takes. I do wonder whether if this thing becomes real, I'm not sure you can rely on players or managers to sit it out.
No. It's been interesting how many of the ones who've spoken out are the ones who are not, probably. I mean, Patrick Bamford was very eloquent last night, but I can't see Patrick Bamford being signed by Barcelona or Juventus.
No.
But there is a point, just on that though, there is a point though, isn't there, which is that just the second point, Chris, I also want to get what you think, and Alastair too, or anyone else actually, which is this idea. I'm really struck. I read a lot of the editorials this morning, and I was really struck by this sort of groupthink, which is, this is terrible. Sort of first third of a leader, badly handled. Second third, fundamental mistake. Third third of the leader. We don't want government intervening in this, the national game, blah, blah, blah. It's for football to sort its own, put its house in order. And I thought to myself, God, that is just such an echo of what we see on so many of these intersections of money and culture. And why is it happening again? And why are we so reluctant, right, to have some intervention? And is there no authority that can sensibly do that?
So I think the case for government intervention is incredibly strong. So it's a cultural event of enormous, genuinely enormous importance. Like, it is if you want to have as a single way of upsetting the most people possible, this is really high up on the list, reducing the aggregate welfare of an enormous volume of people. And it's all for the sort of the benefit and principle of new customers who we don't currently have, whose welfare we might improve at some future point a little bit, perhaps. So I think there's a really clear case for government intervention. There's a really clear case for it being government rather than anyone else because of the externalities involved. So the fact is, if it were just the case that Manchester United were able to make more money and just walk off with this cash, who cares? It's the fact they're going to take this money and they're going to destroy the domestic league by making it impossible for other people to compete with them. They're going to overwhelm the league and they're going to destroy what's known in economics as the competitive balance of the league. And one of the things we know is that slightly more uncertainty in the league, more competitive balance. So having a higher probability of your team randomly winning is an important factor for people wanting to come back. So there is a really strong place for government action, because this cultural thing, which is enormously important, enormous export, is potentially going to be damaged by a group of basically antisocial companies dumping effectively into the league and destroying the league. And I think it's a really obvious public policy, process. And I think there is just a knee-jerk government can't do nothing sort of approach in Britain to business. Like,
I do think, Chris, that Tessa Murray it's a very good nail on the head there.
Which is that? Sorry, there.
She's basically just said, I can think of 100 other things I'd like to see the government intervene in ahead of this.
Can someone just say we got that on film and recorded it? Because that's actually going to go in my This Is My Life, Alastair. Thank you. My job here is done.
But you don't have to queue up in order for, there's lots of things we'd all like the government to do.
No, I'm definitely going to do a bit of whataboutery about this, Chris. I really am. I'm sorry, this one deserves it. That's fine.
But it's also a relatively straightforward fix. That's the thing. Like, you could do this overnight for basically bobbins of cash. You could easily issue a bond, take over Manchester United, repay the bond, neutralize the thing. Like, easy peasy. Like, fixed, done. Anyway, the obvious thing is we should take over Spurs and shut it down. That would be that's my long run game here. But we can't go over things. I don't think we want to nationalize football. I think if you have 6 or 7 institutions that are undermining the other institutions, deal with them. Add you know, just deal with it. Just like stop messing around. We did this to banks. We can do it to football clubs. Anyway, you're muted, James. But
so this is the best bit. This is the best nationalisation to date. You want to nationalise the most, only the half dozen most successful football teams.
The only ones that cause externalities that damage the other football teams.
Fantastic. This is okay. Great.
The other, like Crystal Palace, doesn't have the capacity to damage everyone else. Manchester United does. So
I've got this image. I've got this image right now of Oliver Dowden, who's currently being explained the offside rule as it happens, because I'm not sure this is his mastermind subject either. Saying Chris Cook's got an idea. Let's nationalise the top 6 teams. He's like, is that a good idea? Why don't we do that?
To be clear, they're not the top 6 teams. It's very important we stress they're not the top 6 teams. They are 6 teams who believe they should be the top 6 teams.
6 teams.
Anyway, yeah, right. Sorry, I've my apologies for Spurs bashing. It's a lifetime of practice. Right. Sorry, I'm slightly ground to a halt there. One of the other things that we were actually also talking about is we were going to talk about was Prince Philip, and apologies for the slightly sudden handbrake turn. But actually, I was wondering if I could go back to Alastair while we've got him to ask this big question about what do we think this will do to the monarchy? I mean, Alastair, you were in Downing Street for the last big funeral, to put it bluntly.
Thereby, you're insulting the Queen Mother just as you insulted Celtic by her funeral didn't count. Yeah, I
don't think it was that as big as either of those two. The Queen Mother was very much a Burnley funeral. Yeah, what do you think where do we think we go from this?
Well, I think as ever they've used a very, very big moment to quite good strategic purpose. I don't think much changes, to be honest. I think that it sort of, the funeral went well. The coverage around Philip. I mean, I was talking actually to Peter Morgan, the guy who wrote The Crown the other day. He was saying that when he was researching for The Crown, during the 90s, republicanism was a really big part of the ongoing debate about the royal family. I didn't see a single, not one, piece of coverage anywhere that suggested, we need to get rid of this lot. Whereas in the past, that was part of the debate. And I think what the Queen has done incredibly well, and I think a lot of it is about her. I think that they've absolutely cemented themselves for quite a long time to come. And so I don't think the long-term effects are much, there's going to be much change at all. And I think the William and Harry stuff I don't think that's going to have long-term impact either, because William is so, he's clearly so much in the kind of line of doing it like the Queen. So I don't think much. I think we've had an awful lot of noise over a huge event, and I don't think it changes much at all.
Do you think they've? I mean, I was struck that there was a sort of minor, there was some minor hoo-ha yesterday about Channel 4 attempting to get someone to be Republican, and part of a person who was a Republican saying, no, this just isn't the moment. Like, we know this is crass. Do you think it's? I mean, do you think it's dead, or is it just sleeping?
Well, funny enough, one of the thoughts I had when we were talking about football a minute ago is that it seems to be that this story about the European Super League is replacing. I met so many people who kept telling me, I really don't care about Prince Philip. I couldn't give a damn about Prince Philip and the funeral. I'm really not interested. And it's like most people say, I really don't care about football, but I'm going to talk about it. And I think that I do think it's strange that, and we talk about living in a cancel culture, but it seems to me that the real cancellation comes from those who don't want to have anything other than a very homogenous, we're all thinking and feeling the same thing kind of opinion. And the Royals have always had a bit of that, but actually I think they've got more of it now than they've ever had. And I'm not sure that's very healthy, to be absolutely frank. I mean, I've got huge respect for the Queen, and I maybe understand the monarchy better than I did when I was a a lot younger. But I still think that you surely, in a kind of lively democracy, that you've got to be allowed to say things that just frankly I have not seen anybody saying in the last week or so. And I just think it's a bit weird.
Right. I should say, by the way, before we let you go, congratulations on your civil partnership.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much. Right, I've got to go.
That's allowed. Thank you ever so much. I wonder if we could go to Gregory Mulligan, in fact, because I just Gregory, yeah. Was it Matthew Paris? The autocorrect has jumped on you. But I mean, what was his point? I mean, we're saying Matthew Paris had a comment about there being so few monarchists but many Elizabethists. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I thought it was a very interesting and insightful comment. But I think it also reflects the kind of generational difference. I think there is a lot more sympathy. I think there was generally a lot more sympathy towards the Queen's generation and Prince Philip's, but I think there is a different sentiment towards the younger members. And I thought Matthew Paris's comment was actually very good. And I'm absolutely not a monarchist, but I thought it said something that was true.
In my attitude to the monarchy is that it's basically be a lot of fuss to get rid of, and it strikes me that we have enough arguments about enough things as it is, without needing to pick some more. Do you think Gregory? Do you think would you put yourself in that camp as someone who's sort of affectionate towards the Queen, but when she moves on, your position might change?
Yes, definitely. You can't help but have respect for, the age of the woman and what she does, just as an individual, as a human being. But I really shudder to think what's going to happen when she eventually goes to,
right.
She passes away. I think that the country is going to shut down physically for about a month, and intellectually probably for about 5 years. Right.
Thank you ever so much. We've now hit 2 o'clock. I should point out that after my comments about Celtic earlier, we probably rather overrepresented on Scots overall, like the European Cup, in today's thinking. Thank you ever so much all for joining us. I don't think we got to an answer apart from the fact that despite James's best efforts to make a case for plutocracy, or to understand plutocracy and work out whether it is plutocracy, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. He's muted. He's now complaining. But it's a shame that he's muted. Never mind. I don't think we got to anyone who really could make a good case for what was going on, because I suspect there isn't one. Thanks ever so much everyone for joining us. I'm supposed to tell you what is coming up, and I've forgotten to look it up. But our next thinking is tomorrow evening, Witty Valentine's Age, Have the Scientists Failed Britain at 6:30 with my colleague Matt D'Ancona. It'd be good to see you there. You can book on tortoisemedia.com. Have a nice day.